Story 1. The Carnival's Clown. When I was 14 years old, I had just enough awareness to understand when something felt off. Growing up, I had always been cautious, aware of the dangers lurking in the shadows. My family lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, at the edge of a dead-end block, right next to a vast forest preserve. Across the street from us was a small creek, and if you walked through the woods, you would come across a local park. One warm autumn evening, there was a small carnival being held at that park, and since none of my friends were available to hang out, my mom suggested I go check it out on my own. My mom was always a little more relaxed when it came to letting me go out, so I grabbed my phone and flashlight and made my way through the darkening woods. The path was familiar, but the trees looked different under the dimming sky. After a short walk, I reached the park's edge, where the carnival was being set up. The Ferris wheel stood tall against the sky, and lights from all the rides twinkled in the evening darkness, creating a magical glow. I wandered through the booths and food stands, enjoying the quiet of the nearly empty carnival. It was late, and most people had already gone home, leaving only a few scattered visitors. I found myself drawn to a large circus tent with its bright red and white stripes. The sight of it piqued my curiosity, so I wandered inside to see what was going on. Inside, a few clowns were performing tricks on a small stage. One clown was juggling, another was riding a tiny tricycle, and the third was dancing around, flinging colorful scarves into the air. The dancing clown noticed me standing in the doorway and made a beeline for me, waving me closer with a wide grin painted on his face. I froze, unsure of what to do. I didn't feel immediately scared, but there was something about his exaggerated smile and the way he moved that made me uneasy. I hesitated for a moment before taking a small step back, then another, trying to make myself inconspicuous. The last thing I wanted was to get involved with a group of carnival performers I didn't know. The clown, undeterred, called out to me in a voice that was oddly cheerful, inviting me to come up onto the stage. I could feel the weight of his gaze, and it made my stomach twist. My instinct told me to leave, and I did. I turned away, not looking back, and continued to explore the carnival a bit longer. As the night wore on and the park grew quieter, I started to head back home. I was almost at the forest's edge when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw the same clown, the one who had invited me onto the stage, standing just a few feet away. His face was too brightly painted, his smile too wide, and his eyes glinted with an unsettling intensity. He spoke, his voice too friendly, almost coaxing. He asked if I wanted to see the backstage area of the circus tent, saying I could see all the cool things the audience never gets to. I felt my heart rate spike, my feet froze to the ground as I struggled to find words. I didn't want to go anywhere near him, but I didn't want to seem rude either. I'm good. Thanks, I said quickly, trying to keep my tone steady. Without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked away, my steps quickening until I was almost running. I dared a glance behind me and saw the clown standing still by the tent entrance, watching me. That frozen smile never left his face. I kept walking, my pace growing faster, my heart thumping in my chest. It wasn't until I was well out of sight of the park that I heard the sound of footsteps following me. I spun around, my flashlight flicking wildly. There he was again, just a few yards behind me. That same clown, still smiling, his presence too close for comfort. Fear surged through me, and without thinking, I broke into a run. My breath came in ragged gasps as I sprinted through the woods, the familiar path now unfamiliar and terrifying. I didn't dare look back. I could hear him running too, his steps echoing through the trees. I pushed myself faster, adrenaline fueling my legs, until I finally saw the streetlights ahead. I didn't stop until I reached my front door, where I slammed it shut behind me, panting heavily. My mom was still up, watching TV in the living room. She looked up at me in concern. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile and nodded, trying to catch my breath. "I just ran back from the carnival. I got a little winded, I guess." She didn't press further. I didn't tell her about the clown or the way his gaze had followed me through the dark woods. I didn't want to worry her. I don't know why I didn't say anything, but I've thought about that night many times since. I'll never forget the way the clown's smile looked too wide, too painted, and too wrong. Even now, years later, I still feel the weight of his stare when I walk through the woods near my house.
Story 2. The Clown in the Dark. It was my first year of college, and I had just moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood outside of Atlanta. I was 19 and adjusting to life on my own. I worked part-time at a small coffee shop in the city, which was about a half-hour walk from my off-campus apartment. Usually, I took the bus, but that evening, the weather was nice, the sky was a soft mix of orange and blue, and I decided to walk home instead. It was around 10 p.m. when I finally left the shop. The streets were mostly empty, with only a few cars parked along the sidewalks. The evening felt peaceful, and I was used to walking through the neighborhood at this hour. I had done it many times before, and the only thing on my mind was getting home and unwinding after a long shift. But tonight, something felt different. As I walked down the street lined with old oak trees, the wind seemed to carry whispers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The usual sounds of the neighborhood, the hum of distant cars, the rustling of leaves, seemed strangely muffled, and an odd chill ran through me. I glanced around, trying to reassure myself. Everything seemed normal: well-kept lawns, streetlights flickering on, empty sidewalks. Yet, I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. I passed a small park, where children usually played during the day, but now it was empty. The playground equipment was silhouetted against the fading sky, and it looked abandoned, almost eerie. I picked up my pace, hoping to get home faster. But then, I heard it. At first, it was faint, like the sound of something being dragged along the pavement. I stopped and turned around. The street behind me was empty, no sign of anyone. I shook my head, telling myself it was probably an animal or my mind playing tricks. I started walking again, trying to push the unease away. But then I heard it again, a laugh. Not a friendly, joyful laugh, but a high-pitched, unsettling giggle that seemed to pierce through the silence. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just in my head. The laugh was real. And it was coming from behind me. I turned around, but all I saw was the empty street. No one was there. I hurried my steps, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe just someone out for a late-night stroll, maybe even a prank. I kept walking faster, my breathing shallow, my pace quickening. The streetlights flickered, casting twisted shadows on the sidewalk. The air grew colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. When I passed the park again, I glanced toward it, and that's when I saw him. Standing just at the edge of the park, barely illuminated by the streetlight, was a figure in a ragged clown costume. His makeup was smeared, and his expression was twisted into a grin that sent chills down my spine. I could feel my legs go numb. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to tell myself it was just some Halloween prank. But it didn't feel like a joke. The clown stood there, unmoving, staring directly at me with wide, hollow eyes. "Hey, sweetie," he called in a voice that was deep and raspy, completely out of place for a costume. "Got a minute?" I didn't answer. I didn't think I could. I was already turning away, my feet moving faster than my mind could catch up. I ran, pushing myself to sprint as my heart raced in panic. I could hear the clown's laugh again, louder now, following me. The sound was sharp and mocking, and it felt like it was coming from all directions. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I reached an intersection and saw a convenience store up ahead. The lights from the store were a beacon, and I bolted toward it, hoping someone was inside. I reached the door, but the store was closed. I nearly collapsed, my mind racing, my hands trembling. A car's headlights appeared suddenly, blinding me for a moment. The car screeched to a halt in front of me, and the window rolled down. I barely registered the man behind the wheel, but his voice broke through my fear. "Get in," he shouted, urgency in his voice. Without thinking, I jumped into the car and slammed the door shut. The man's eyes were wide with concern, and he didn't waste time speaking. "That clown. I saw him, too," he said, his voice tense. "He's been hanging around here for weeks." I didn't have the strength to respond. My mind was still fogged with fear, and my body was trembling too hard to form words. He drove me through the quiet streets, glancing over at me every now and then to make sure I was okay. I kept looking out the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the clown still following us. But the road behind was empty. When we finally reached my apartment building, I was so shaken I barely remembered to thank him. He offered to walk me to my door, but I just wanted to get inside. I rushed up the stairs, locked the door behind me, and pressed my back against it, trying to steady my breath. I couldn't sleep that night. The sound of that laugh, sharp, mocking, kept echoing in my mind. I kept wondering if it had all been a bad dream, just my imagination running wild. But the next morning, as I walked to work, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a bright red rubber clown nose, lying right in the middle of the sidewalk outside the park. I froze. That same clown nose. I knew then that whatever had happened wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I never walked home from work again after that night, always taking the bus or asking someone for a ride. And to this day, I avoid that park and the streets I once walked so comfortably. The memory of the clown still haunts me, and every time I hear a distant laugh in the night, I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, waiting.
Story 3. The clown that haunted me. Up until the age of 11, I always had a fear of clowns. It all started when I was 5, at a carnival in the middle of a cold October evening. My parents were out of town for the weekend, and my older brother was at a friend's house. My best friend Lila invited me to walk to a nearby park where a small fair was set up. I agreed, not thinking much about it. We walked through the quiet streets of our suburban neighborhood and entered the park, which was nearly empty except for a few families here and there. The carnival rides creaked in the wind, and the faint sounds of the Ferris wheel spinning added to the odd atmosphere. After wandering around and playing a few games, we encountered him, the clown. He didn't speak. Instead, he made exaggerated hand gestures and danced clumsily around, his painted smile wide and unsettling. His clothes were worn and dirty, and his makeup was smudged, as if he hadn't bothered to fix it after a long day. We both found it strange, but we shrugged it off and continued exploring the park. As we walked away, I noticed the clown slowly inching closer to us, as though he was watching us from a distance. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Eventually, we decided it was time to leave, and Lila suggested we head home before it got too late. We were walking down the quiet streets when we started hearing footsteps behind us. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and closer. We turned around, but no one was there. The footsteps continued, and we both started to feel a growing sense of unease. Lila, who was always braver than me, said we should keep walking and not look back. But I felt like something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. When we finally reached my house, I fumbled through my jacket pockets for the key. That's when Lila nudged me and whispered, "Look!" I turned around and froze. There, standing just outside the bushes at the neighbor's yard, was the clown. His smile was still there, but now it was much more sinister. He was watching us intently, and I could feel my stomach drop. The clown stepped out from behind the bush and started walking toward us. My heart raced as I scrambled to unlock the door. I finally managed to get it open, slamming it shut behind us. We both rushed upstairs to my room, our breaths shallow from the fear that gripped us. Lila and I huddled near the window, peering out into the dark yard. To our horror, the clown was standing in the driveway, staring up at the window. It was as if he was waiting for us to come outside. We hid behind the curtains, hoping he wouldn't see us. Time seemed to slow as we waited, our hearts pounding in our chests. After what felt like an eternity, the clown finally turned around and walked off into the darkness. We didn't know if he was still hiding nearby, watching us from the shadows. We just knew that we had barely escaped whatever he had planned. I called my parents immediately, but there was no way to explain what had just happened. The fear stayed with me long after the clown was gone. The next day, I heard reports of strange incidents happening around town. The news mentioned clowns luring children into the woods. It was unsettling to think that I had been one of the first to experience something so terrifying. I couldn't shake the feeling that the clown could have been lurking nearby all night, watching, waiting. For weeks, I couldn't walk around the neighborhood without constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that same disturbing smile staring back at me. It was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every time I passed those bushes, my heart would skip a beat, wondering if he was still out there, watching me. Now, with all the news reports of clowns stalking people, I can't help but think back to that night. I have no idea what the clown wanted, why he targeted us, or if he had a group of others just like him. But what I do know is that I'll never see a clown the same way again.